sharing and networking in the social sector across the Nordic countries. My name is Leif Olsen, and I'm a senior researcher at VIVE, the Danish Center for Social Science Research. Today I stand in for Jakob Trane Ibsen, a chief research analyst in VIVE. Jakob has facilitated the 3 previous webinars in this series. He is prevented to participate today and asked me to say hello and remind everybody that the seminars or the webinar is recorded and will be accessible at VIVE's website. Carsten, who is facilitating the whole thing in the technical terms, will send you all a link to when the material is ready, so you can go in and see it or pass it on to someone else who could be interested. So today's seminar is the 4th in the series on disability research and practice in the Nordic countries. It is sponsored by the Nordic Welfare Center. Thank you for that. Today's webinar provides 3 keynote speeches followed by a session for comments, questions, and discussions. Hans Kloppenborg, Chief Research Analyst in VIVE, presents the overall results from the report, Development of Interventions in the Social Field in the Nordic Countries. The focus is on the potentials and challenges of knowledge sharing about interventions in the social sector between the Nordic countries. Andra Carlsen, head coordinator in the Nordic Network for Adult Learning, talks about learning and governance of networks across the Nordic countries based on experiences from the Nordic Network for Adult Learning. Kai Koivumäki, operations manager at the Nordic Welfare Center, talks about establishing and maintaining networks in the social sector across the Nordic countries from the perspective of the Nordic Welfare Center. Each speaker gives a presentation of about 20 minutes. The 3 presentations are followed by a half-an-hour session for comments, questions, and discussions. We do not have a plenary session, but you are welcome to share knowledge, views, information, opinions, etc. Using the chat function. Questions can be asked in the chat function also, and we will ask them if we are able to do that. I welcome the 3 presenters, and I will start to give over the word to you, Hans. Welcome.
Thank you, Leif. I will just see if I can share my slides. So, yes, that looks right. Okay, thank you. Yes, my name is Hans, and I work here at VIVE. And last year, me and my colleague Maria did a study for the Nordic Council of Ministers that ended out with this report that I've put in a picture of here. And today I'm going to go through some of the main results we found regarding opportunities and challenges for trans-Nordic collaboration on interventions in the social field. So, if this will work. Yes. So the study had 2 overall purposes. And the first was to dig into how development of interventions in the social field was organized at state level in the Nordic countries. And we looked both at how state actors worked with developing new interventions in the different Nordic countries, and also how state actors worked with assessing and disseminating knowledge about existing interventions that were used in the social field in the different Nordic countries. And then the second purpose, which is the most relevant today, I guess, was to look into what needs, possibilities, and challenges state actors experience for some potential future joint platform for sharing knowledge about interventions in the social field across the Nordic countries. So how we carried out this study was to first do a mapping of the overall distribution of responsibility in the social field in each of the Nordic countries, and identify which state actors were the most relevant for us to put focus on. Then secondly, we did an analysis of websites and documents that we got from these from the identified state actors. And then last but not least, we did interviews with state actors, with the relevant state actors from each of the Nordic countries. And these interviews were based on a preliminary written description that we from VIVE had done based on our the two first stages of the data collection process. So we did a preliminary description of how processes for developing interventions was carried out in each country, and then we used that as a basis for the interviews with these state actors. We interviewed in total 27 different state actors that were involved in developing interventions in the social field in the Nordic countries. Furthermore, we had continuous dialogue with different relevant contact persons from these state actors. So we did interviews with them, but we also talked to them through the whole process. Good. Before digging into the results, I would also just like to say a little about some of the important delimitations of this study. And first, it's important to talk a little about what we mean when we say the social field, and we looked at it in a kind of broad sense, you could say. We included interventions focused on people with either disabilities or social problems. So we included interventions that were focused on, for example, children in out-of-home care, adults and children with different disabilities, adults with drug or alcohol addiction, people with psychiatric problems, homelessness, etc. We didn't include medical services, special education, or care for the elderly. However, it was a quite, what could you say, a broad, we looked at the social field in rather broad terms. Secondly, I think it's important to just say a little about what we mean when we say state actors. We primarily think of ministerial departments and agencies, and we interviewed a lot of them. But in some of the countries, it was also relevant to include other organizations as state actors if the state level had some influence of the way that the organization was operating. It could, for example, be by giving directions on and funding specific interventions that the organization was to develop. As an example, I can mention some of the Norwegian competence centers. They are associated with universities, and basically universities were not included as state actors in our study, but since some of these competence centers was to a fairly large extent getting funding and also specific instructions from some of the Norwegian ministries, we included some of them anyway. And yes, just the last point here, it can be rather hard to make a completely clear-cut delimitation of this concept of state actors. Before digging into the main results, I would just like to say that in this presentation, I have focused on the overall results from the study that regards knowledge sharing across the Nordic countries. But there is also a big part of the report that deals with detailed descriptions of how state actors in the individual Nordic countries work with developing interventions in the social field. So if some of you have an interest for one or more specific of the Nordic country, you can find more in-depth knowledge there. Good. On an overall level, I guess the main result from the study is that the Nordic countries have a lot of overall similarities regarding challenges and values and organization in the social field. And therefore, knowledge sharing across the Nordic countries is in general seen as important and giving for the state actors that we interviewed. Generally speaking, they also find it more meaningful than knowledge sharing with other countries, for example, the US. It is just easier to implement or import knowledge from another Nordic country because the setting is so similar than it is to import knowledge from, for example, the US or the UK. We also found that on an overall level, there are some similarities in state actors' responsibilities and how development of interventions is carried out in practice. So in most of the Nordic countries, state actors have an overall responsibility for gathering knowledge about interventions, while local levels, such as municipalities, they are responsible for choosing and delivering interventions. So again, these similarities just makes knowledge sharing easier and more meaningful across the Nordic countries than other countries. In the study and in the interviews with the different state actors, we specifically focused on two potential platforms for sharing knowledge on interventions across the Nordic countries. And the first was networks. Interviewees generally view networks as a good way to exchange knowledge and to get inspiration on your own practice. Networks give good opportunities for understanding the local context for interventions, which is important because, as I said, although it is although it's easier to implement or import an intervention from another Nordic country than, for instance, from the UK, still there is some translation process that you have to get into when importing an intervention or knowledge from another country. And that's easy to get. It's easier to get like that, a sense of the local context when you're in a network. Furthermore, participants in a network get personal relations with people working within the same area as themselves in the other countries, which makes it easier to take contact when in need of help. So it makes it easier to just write an email or grab the phone and call that specific person in the ministry in that other country because you already have a relation to that person. An attention point that was brought up in general was that although networks are seen as very giving, it's also important to note that, of course, it takes time and commitment from all involved for networks to be successful. The other potential type of platform for knowledge sharing that we looked into was the idea of making a new trans-Nordic website that could gather information on, for example, specific interventions that were used across the Nordic countries. So like a data bank, you could say, on interventions. Some interviewees saw a potential in this sort of website, but there were also several who were skeptical to that idea. And I guess one of the attention points that the more skeptical interviewees pointed out was that it can be hard to agree on, for example, criteria for assessing interventions in the social field. Because while in all the Nordic countries, the state actors that we talk to, they all use scientific criteria when assessing interventions, but there is some variation in what specific scientific criteria are used, and also how much weight is given to other criteria when assessing interventions. For example, getting the latest experiences from the practice field. In some countries, this is an important issue. In other countries, it's more the hard scientific criteria can say alone that are given weight. Also, so it can be hard to agree on that. I guess that's the point. Another attention point regarding such a trans-Nordic website was a concern that it might require considerable maintenance and updating to keep such a website going. Okay, so even though we found that on an overall level, knowledge sharing across the Nordic countries has potential, we also found that on a more detailed level, you could say, it can be hard to define themes and aims for a joint knowledge sharing platform, for example, a network that is viewed as highly relevant for all countries. So, in other words, it can be hard to find common ground. And this is partly because of some differences among the countries, as is what we found. Firstly, smaller countries, as for example, Greenland and the Faroe Islands, they generally have fewer resources for developing interventions and for gathering knowledge about it. So, on the one hand, these smaller countries, they have a bigger need for getting inspiration from other countries, but at the same time, they also have less inspiration to give on to others. Secondly, differences in, for example, population density affect the needs that state actors in different countries experience. Again, this is relevant for the smaller countries, but also for the parts of, for example, Norway that are less populated. Here, the challenges and the possible solutions are often different from more populated areas. For example, because it can be harder to hire enough professionals who are sufficiently skilled. So that's an issue. Thirdly, state actors in some countries have more active roles in the development of interventions than in other countries. So this is also just a difference between the countries and between state actors. And then lastly, but not the least, there can be different local priorities in the different countries that may differ over time or change over time. So what is seen as a highly relevant problem in 2024 might not be the most important problem to, let's say, Danish politicians and the Danish government the next year. And that can be hard, those differences over time. So overall, this just means that countries might seek to fulfill different needs through a platform for knowledge sharing, and also that some countries' commitment might fall over time. So just to sum up on our results, knowledge sharing on interventions across the Nordic countries definitely has potential, because there are great similarities across the Nordic countries on an overall level, which means that knowledge sharing is just meaningful at the outset. But also there are important differences between the countries and between the state actors on a more detailed level. And I guess because of that, I think it's important to be aware of some of these differences if one wants to further or to enhance Nordic cooperation on knowledge sharing. So I guess it's important to be aware or be interested in, of course, what specific topics or interventions have the biggest interest across countries, where is the common ground, you could say. And also, how does the distribution of responsibility in each country, how are the criteria for assessing interventions, or how are the national priorities? How do they differ across countries and across relevant actors? And use this as like in an analysis, I guess, on how might these differences affect our ambition for more trans-Nordic cooperation within a given field. Yes, and there's just the last basic point, I guess, is that no matter how you do it, knowledge sharing takes both time and strong commitment. Yeah, I think that was my presentation.
Thank you very much, Hans. And we'll get the opportunity to discuss it a little bit. But before that, we will have the presentation first from you, Andra. Welcome. We are very happy to have you here. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I would like to say great thanks to the organizers for inviting me and to talk about the networks, because that is a theme that is very close to my heart. I've been working as a head coordinator for NVL for 50+ years, and I really will echo some of your concerns and challenges, because that is also what we experience in our work. I just want to check before I go on. Can you see the presentation okay? No? Try again. What about now? Perfect. My name is Andra Carlsen, and I am the head coordinator of NVL. NVL stands for the Nordic Network for Adult Learning. And I will, let's see if I could also change my slides. Yes. I plan to talk about NVL as a network organization in its form, how it is being shaped, but also in the way it's working through networks, and then talk a bit more in general about networking and learning in networks. It is experience from NVL, and it is also from Copenhagen universities that did the study, evaluation, and research on NVL and its networks. And I hope time allows to give a short example from NVL Digital Inclusion, which is one concrete Nordic network, what they do and how they work on adult learning. Well, this is NVL as a network organization. Our core team is from all the Nordic countries, the 5 Nordic countries and the 3 autonomous areas, Greenland, Faroe Islands, and Åland Islands, with all its differences in size, in number of inhabitants and so on. But the network is created to support lifelong learning in the Nordic countries. And here the core team has to agree and define what are the areas of work. And then we create networks around these themes that the Nordic governments prioritize. NVL is an organization under the Nordic Council of Ministers. That means the Nordic governments decide that, first of all, cooperation on adult learning is important, and all the countries agree on that, and then they give the funding, and then the countries together have to define the more concrete themes within the spectrum of lifelong learning. What can we develop together? And we work very much with the way what also the previous speaker talked. We make analysis, we make reports, comparisons, mapping studies, and then the networks also create some development work that then goes back to the countries and go back to the Nordic Council of Ministers for further development or policy making. NVL has 8 active networks this year, and here is a bit of Nordic slide in Scandinavian languages, but I guess you all are familiar with that. You can see the fields of operation under the umbrella lifelong learning. These are more specific networks, more nerdy, you could say, going in depth. It's about digital competencies, it's about sustainable development learning, learning in prisons. This picture is not static, it's actual and valid for last year, for this year. maybe for next year. But the networks shape themselves according to the Nordic priorities. That's the decision. And as long as the theme is on the Nordic agenda, then there is an active and living network. When the theme is taken off from the Nordic agenda, then we must have some kind of exit strategy beforehand, how to end that and how to close that issue. But this is how NVL networks look like this year. And the four main and common, you could say, fields of operation from the departure of network is supporting the country's ongoing work, facilitating change, giving some kind of added value in the field of operations, and of course, experience sharing. There are some borderlines between them, but one of the tasks is, what does it mean, support the ongoing work? Like you mentioned, the social sector, the countries have different interventions, the same concerning lifelong learning. There are VET reforms, there is a recognition of prior learning, simply to support, to find out what countries need, and through mapping of good examples and analysis support this works. The countries will decide themselves their policies and interventions, but they get kind of inspiration through the work that NVL is doing. Then, of course, facilitating change, that is the next level. A concrete example now is the countries are working on strategies for sustainable development, linking to the international goals. And here, it's a field that is very complex, and the countries are struggling really how to define what is the role of learning. And there we have made interviews with all the countries. What is the policy? How can education support learning? And some countries are further than the others, and that can really make the change or developments faster in those countries that don't have it as yet. So that's another level of experience. Added value would be the creating methods, tools, really more concrete things, or making policy recommendations in the smaller fields where countries in operation, they work on these issues, but the field is quite small. So the possibilities of research, of know-how is limited. So pooling the resources, we can create something that all the countries can use. And of course, very important is the experience sharing, what you also talked about. This is all what Nordic cooperation is about. The countries cannot decide how the others are going to work, but this continuous experience sharing is really appreciated by all the Nordic countries. And in short, to say that it is the Nordic Council of Ministers that gives the mandate to NVL, to the Nordic network in the broad context. That's cooperation in lifelong learning. And then the networks, you mentioned also, Hans, the local context, the national needs, the needs of the target group. That's the experts. They know what organizations or groups of people, what they need. And then it is the NVL core teams, the coordinators, they have to give the necessary support and facilitation to the networks, because like you said, it is a commitment, it takes time, and it takes effort. And of course, in our case, it is also the Nordic money that supports this cooperation, because they support this facilitation. They don't pay the networks, but they create the platform, you could say. That was about NVL, and then I would mention a few things in general about networking, but also linking to our work and how we have dealt with these issues. This is from the Copenhagen University study. That is the case of NVL. The red dot in the middle, that's our coordinators. That's a node, because we have a coordinator taking care of all these different organizations having common interest. Ideally, according to the theory, they would say the node is not important. It's not needed. The network, the knowledge and experience should flow freely. But then again, it is much more difficult to start on. It's difficult to continue the network. The node is this extra help, but it is not a deciding body. It is a supporting body to in the governing process and in shaping the network and recruiting the members and so on. And the networks can be established top down or bottom up. NVL, you could say, is established top-down. It is established by the Nordic governments, by the Nordic Council of Ministers, and it gives the mandate to that. And I spoke about the Nordic and national synergies. In fact, it's even more complex. There are EU issues, there are global issues that the countries need to take into consideration. But the common Nordic interest is that NVL, the Nordic network, should support the national development in lifelong learning. And if the countries put more focus on EU issues, then we should also take that into consideration. Some do more than the others. Again, that's a different situation. So we, in principle, have been established top down, while a lot of work is done bottom up. It's up to the networks to reach consensus. It's about the networks to see that there is a necessary competence. So after the decision is taken and there is some financing, there is a lot of freedom and own integrity in each network to see that the right competencies in the network, the representation of organizations is there, so that everything that is done at the Nordic level can also be taken back to the national level, that there are the relevant links for implementation. And that's a very, it's a balance, because like you mentioned, you could think we'll have this university and we'll have this ministry, and then the information will be forwarded to the national level. And what about the practitioners? So these issues are all the time being discussed, how to get the right competence and the right representation in the networks to make them function. So that is about this top-down and bottom-up approach. The next issue that we discuss a lot in our networks is the capacity in the networks, how it should be led, how much it should be formalized, and also how long the networks run and how to ensure the continuity in the networks and how often the members can change. Like you also said, it is a commitment for the organizations. And in our case, the national coordinators really, they are an important link to ensure that the work is done between the meetings, that the people get their material, that they can prepare, they can follow up on that. The networks differ. The 8 networks that I showed you concerning leadership, besides the coordinator, they also, some of the networks have chosen to rotate the leadership among the countries. So one year it is Sweden working closer with NVL coordinator. Next year it's Åland Islands, in order to prepare the meetings, to write notes and so on. Some have chosen just to have one leading country and organization cooperating, and that's up to them and to discuss these issues. And concerning formalizing and institutionalizing, our main tool is the yearly work plan. That is what the networks agree on. There is some funding for the development work, and then there's a year plan, which is linked to the goals of the Nordic cooperation of the Nordic Council of Ministers. And that's looked through and planned and evaluated every year. So this is how we work from the organization perspective. And the final, the one but least, the final slide about networks in general is also what you mentioned before, Hans, about how to agree on common issues. And then our main principle would be that we discuss this, that it's a give and take work in a network. It will never be, not all the countries and members will be equal all the time. In some year, it will be more Norway and Finland contributing because they have more expertise on the issues. The others are more receivers. But that again has to be discussed on a yearly basis and according to the work plan, in order that the networks and the countries feel that they can bring something. And of course the relevance, because what the networks really appreciate is the experience. They have enormous experience that is pooled in the network, and they have direct access to that. And we sometimes say the network members can vote with their feet. They can just leave the network if it's not relevant. They cannot be forced. So a very good indication of that it's relevant and that they can give something and take something is that they stay in the network. And then about the level of exchange and the level of learning, you also spoke about it is easier in the Nordic countries to adopt and adapt others' experiences, but still the transfer among the countries, among organizations, that's really a challenge. And what the Copenhagen University, what they said that it is okay, in fact, to simply see your own experience in a different light and say, we are doing fine. Or maybe seeing and getting some new insight and inspiration, and then going home and trying to change something, and then putting really the learning in use when it's a transfer issue and really adopting the practices, which doesn't happen always, but we shouldn't become unhappy about that, because that mutual learning and seeing things in different light is also very essential. And then a very important part in the networks is trust. It takes time, and that is a precondition for learning in networks, because once there is trust, once there is open atmosphere, then the member organizations can share both good and bad practices. It's not only bringing the flagship initiatives, but really digging deep and finding the learning points also from the practice that didn't work out, finding out why it didn't work out. So that, and it really takes time. And what we have also experienced is that in more homogeneous networks, for example, networks of universities, not networks of state public organizations, it's easier. It takes shorter time because we think differently. We are governed by the same rules. So we trust each other. But the other thing is that the diversity has enormous potential. When you put practice and research and policy in the same room, the discussions really it's another dynamics of discussions, but it maybe takes more time to build trust in heterogeneous networks than where we are more or less similar and think alike and are governed in a similar way. So this was a bit what Copenhagen University found out, discussing the different Nordic networks and NVL in particular, and related to how we deal with that. And I will end with giving an example from NVL Digital Inclusion. I chose this network because they are working for improving the possibilities for Nordic citizens and adults to use different types of digital services to take part in learning and also to develop in working life. And in the one common you could say phrase, we call them hard to reach learners or hard to reach adults. And some of the target groups maybe are those that you also mentioned, that you looked for the interventions that the countries are working with, how really to get everyone on board. And we are not there yet in the Nordic countries. There are many groups who from different reasons are excluded for that. And the network started with looking at what initiatives countries had. And the task was not to create new, but to improve the existing ones. And the improvement was done together with the target groups that the countries chose themselves. One country worked with needs, the young adults who are not in education training. Another worked with almost illiterate people. There were some homeless people groups in another. So they together looked at the existing offers and suggested different solutions. So out of that research came policy recommendations. Like they are in the Nordic countries, they are quite on a general level, but then again, each country can take the policy recommendations and translate into their context and or translate to specific target groups. But all the countries agreed this is important for us to improve digital inclusion. So that's for the policy level. About added value, this research also gave a starting point to a toolkit, which now consists of 2 different tools. That is for frontline workers, that is people who meet those with digital challenges in order to start the discussion. It can be a guidance counselor, it can be a librarian. There are different groups of workers. So this is what the countries have created together. It's translated to all the Nordic languages and adapted for the national use. That's for the practitioners. That's another result that the network has created. And sharing of experience in the form of workshops, seminars, and webinars. So this network also tries to follow up for the policy recommendations, having policy meetings for practitioners, but also joint meetings in order to make the policy and practice to meet and discuss how can these toolkits be further implemented and contribute to the policy. And it's a heterogeneous network. It's connecting the education field, connecting working life, social field, policymakers and practitioners. This is how the countries have chosen to work. They are not present from all the countries, but across the Nordic countries, the different sectors are present and combine different competencies in this network. And I would like to towards the end say that this is a testimony from one of our networks also working. What you also mentioned, we are similar, but we are still different. So the important thing is that the network has a common goal. They agree on the goal, they agree on some paths and tools, but they bring different perspectives and experiences. And that's a great source of inspiration for going home and doing things together. And what we also do in order to make the Nordic voice stronger, we try to facilitate collaboration when it's possible and when it's relevant among these networks, so that working life can also speak for basic skills, so that a Nordic Alpha Council for really people with low-level literacy can also talk to working life. It's not always possible, but when it's possible, they really, each sector gets an additional strength so that they can bring the voice back to the national context together, because maybe in a similar way, social field, of course, it's a priority like lifelong learning is, but when it comes to policies and financing, we know that it's always a competition between the sectors. So we try to bring actors together and give them a stronger voice. This is what I wanted to share from NVL. On the last slide on my presentation, there are different tools and resources that we use and share. It is about adult learning, but maybe something of it could be also interesting for your field and work. So you are welcome to take a look at these links. And then I would like to say thank you again for being able to share the NVL experience here. And then I will stop sharing my screen.
Thank you very much, Atra. It was very inspiring. And I'll give the word to you, Kai, to follow up with your presentation.
Thank you very much. I try to take up the I suppose it looks all right. Yes, thank you also for my part for the invitation to the webinar. And thank you to Hans and Andra for inspiring presentations. And I can see that we have a lot of in common here, which I suppose, can discuss maybe a little later on. Maybe I'm a little envious of Andra's analytic approach to all the topic, because we have just like woken up a little recently concerning our networks in the Nordic Welfare Center. We have more maybe had focus on projects previously, and not maybe understood the meaning of the networks actually. And we have recently just started to lift up the question of networks, and also we are thinking that we will make a little more visibility and meaning for and somehow discuss the meaning of our networks. Yes, I think I forgot to tell something about myself, but I'm working as operations manager in Nordic Welfare Center, and I'm working in the Stockholm office. We have a small office in Helsinki too. But I think I could start maybe giving a little context to our work with networks. Our mission is to contribute to the development of welfare initiatives in the Nordic region, and we are a knowledge organization, so we try to compile and disseminate knowledge on welfare issues. I think mainly we are working for the public sector. That is the primary audience, politicians, authorities in national levels, but also other levels in the Nordic countries. We also work a lot with researchers. It's more and more common to work with the civil society and different kind of interest organizations also today. We are trying to study and promote the Nordic welfare model. I think we can agree that there still are quite a lot of similarities concerning the welfare model, but there are also a lot of challenges that we are working on all the time. For example, the economical challenges at the moment, how to finance all the services and challenges with digitalization, for example, and what the consequences are for the citizens and so on. We are working under the Nordic Council of Ministers for Health and Social Affairs, and then there is the Nordic Committee of Senior Officials for Health and Social Affairs. That is the practical steering and cooperation comes from them, not directly from the ministers. And then, of course, we are working quite a lot with the Nordic Council of Ministers Secretariat and getting our annual assignment from there and the goals and targets, what we are then supposed to do. Then as a Nordic institution, then we have a lot of projects and working groups and networks, and that's I'm going to present a little more about now. Our focus areas are children and youth, older adults, the elderly, disability, cooperation, welfare technology, integration of immigrants, and public health. We are not working directly with medical questions. That is also, those topics are also under the Nordic Council of Ministers of Social and Health, but we as an institution are not working with those questions. We are not either working directly with, for example, the social security systems in the Nordic countries. There is the authorities have their own cooperation, and we are not involved in that. Well, we have three main, what could you say, forms of cooperation, and it's our seminars and conferences, publications, and networks. And actually, we have now concluded that networks are almost the most important of those three pillars. In all of them, or those three, we of course try to disseminate and communicate knowledge. Yes, here are some facts about our networks. My presentation it's not a scientific or analytic approach. It's more observations that we have made here in the institution, and I think that we should maybe make a little more analytical studies concerning our networks. But here are some facts how we are working. Altogether, we in Nordic Welfare Center, we have 25 active networks at the moment. And well, we don't call all of them for networks because we have many kind of working groups also in, I mean, the names can differ quite a lot. There are also 15 Nordic networks coordinated from the Nordic Council of Ministers in Copenhagen, and we are not involved in them, and they are usually then in the area of medical cooperation, for example. So this is the distinction between the responsibility with Copenhagen and us. We have then. And yes, I want to emphasize that this is the status at the moment, because the networks and working groups come and go. We have fortunately had more and more long-term projects and networks recently, but the problem is often that when the projects are quite short, then the long-term work is not that easy, but I think it's actually going into a little different, a better direction at the moment. Expert networks, which we have, here are some examples of them. Expert networks for us, I think they mainly consist of persons, representatives from the national implementing authorities as national boards of Socialstyrelsen, for example, or Institution for Health and Welfare in Finland. This kind of implementing and developing level of authorities. We have some cooperation with the also with the ministries, but I think most of our cooperation is concentrated on this kind of a developing level. We have one network, the first 1,000 years in the child's life. All that is also consisted of persons from national authorities. We have physical activity and public health area. Persons in complex needs of social services. That is actually quite a recent one, which started, Antra mentioned that there can be bottom-up and top-down networks, and how they how the networks are started. This is actually a network which started bottom-up. We have quite long cooperation in dementia. We have several dementia networks. We have a leader forum for deaf blindness. That's mainly for policy work concerning how you organize questions concerning deaf blindness in the Nordic countries. We have a network for age-friendly cities. That is an exception because we are directly working with the Nordic cities in this network. That's not national authorities. And the mandate for these expert networks, many times they come directly from the committee of senior officials, which I mentioned earlier. Then we have research networks. We have a big one in welfare technology, about 100 researchers at the moment. We have experience network in disability, which is, I think, organizing these webinars, for example. Then we have starting up research network in deaf blindness. There are about 30 members at the moment. It's quite interesting when when you start studying, you can have an idea that there isn't very much research done, for example, in certain areas like deaf blindness, which is quite a small area in each country. But then when you start exploring and suddenly you find anyway quite a lot of researchers, and suddenly we had about 30 researchers there. So it's very interesting somehow that you don't really know the reality, how it looks like in real life before you study it. We have starting up a network for children in low-income families at the moment, which is within one project. We have then, of course, we have those reference groups, steering committees, etc., in our Nordic projects. Well, for example, we have a 4-year project on COVID-19 consequences, which has both a steering committee and a reference group. these actually these groups can vary quite a lot. There are different kinds of participants. Usually there are researchers, authorities, decision makers, also practitioners, and also NGOs. So that is actually it's different maybe from the expert networks, which are often more homogeneous. Well, then we have something which are working like networks, but maybe could be called more like some kind of Nordic organs. We have a Nordic Disability Council, for example, which has a mandate for 5 years, and is more, and also their mandate comes directly from the ministers, and then it's somehow maybe a higher organizing status in a way than many other networks. Yes, when one curiosity still is that we have a Nordic funding scheme for the Nordic disability organizations, and once a year we give some not very much money, but anyway money for Nordic cooperation for the organizations, Nordic and Baltic organizations, for their networking activities, which is not very much money, but very important for them, because they couldn't have the Nordic meetings, for example, and this networking without the support. Well, then finally some findings and experiences. I think the networks for us, they expand the formal Nordic cooperation very much, and they anchor the work in national and local context in the surroundings in the countries. If you only think what is the budget or count what is the budget for the official Nordic cooperation, what the Nordic Council of Ministers employ who are employed, how much it costs, you don't really get a realistic picture of the Nordic cooperation, because it's much wider because of the networks. I actually counted that if we have those 25 networks and 15 networks that are coordinated from Copenhagen, it makes that there are all the time at the moment from 400 to 600 participants around in the Nordic countries only for our networks, and this is only a small part of all the Nordic cooperation and the networks all together. So it's really there is a meaning to. I mean, it's good to talk about networks, I think. I think you, Andra, at least you mentioned that these informal contacts, bilateral contacts, are very important. Also, it's not only in the meetings that the networking happens. It's very common that you take contact to some or one of the persons you have met in the meetings and start bilateral cooperation. Networks are absolutely necessary and crucial for our knowledge production. It is some kind of an quality assurance, I think, that we have working networks around the knowledge production. We use the networks in all phases of the production. To find the right knowledge, networks are working already there. Then to gather and put up the knowledge, to get all the knowledge from the Nordic countries, it's not always easy just to Google the way forward. You need persons who know something about their own countries. To distribute the knowledge, when we have made, for example, publication, then we need, I think the networks are crucial in the distribution. Then to apply the knowledge, it goes even longer. I mean, many times you get the good solutions and the interventions that Hans were talking about, and then how you can take it in to the everyday life in another country or a region or a municipality, wherever it then happens. Personal engagement is important. it has to be a win-win situation for the participant. According to our experiences, the formal high-level networks, for example, which are very formally started top down, for example, they don't always work as well as they can work well also, but not as well as if we are talking about the implementing developing levels and we go to a methodological questions maybe, then it's easier to understand that it really you get a lot discussing with the colleagues in the same situation. We have very good experiences actually for example, especially the project groups or working groups in the projects where the project leader then can tailor-made make the groups. It's quite demanding because it takes a lot of time, but when if you have time to somehow to find the right persons, then the group dynamics, you can suppose that the group dynamics and the engagement works even better than in those formal settings. I want to do a little marketing for Emilia Berg's master thesis. She was a master student, is a master at the moment, but anyway, she wrote her master's thesis concerning Nordic Welfare Centers networks. And she interviewed some actors in the Nordic cooperation, not only we who are employed in the Nordic, but also our stakeholders in the countries, and also made some surveys concerning the networks. And she concluded in the thesis that there is Nordic added value for our networks, but there are some challenges also. You could reduce or raise some barriers to collaboration. Sometimes the interests are lacking, not maybe for the persons who are participating, but for the organizations. They don't always see maybe on the management level the meaning of the Nordic cooperation, so that could be changed maybe. More resources, of course, because we are living in very tight times economically, and every penny counts. So if you don't see meaning for the Nordic cooperation, then it disappears from the budget. European Union cooperation, according to her somehow distracts maybe a little resources from the Nordic cooperation. I think we should all the time somehow to try to see what is our relationship to the Nordic, to the European cooperation, and not be competing with them. Too much measuring and focus on the concept defining and so on can restrict Nordic cooperation. So it's actually the informality that she also pointed out in as a positive thing in her thesis. Then some suggestions for development of networking. Diversity is very important. I think there are both homogeneous and heterogeneous groups that work very well. Keep it creative and informal. I think you should also trust the experiences of participants. If they feel that they get something out of it, usually it is true. It's very difficult to measure effects of the Nordic cooperation directly. Was it really the Nordic cooperation that made an effect in a national policy, for example? There are some areas, for example, welfare technology for us, it's quite easy there to see direct effects, because if a region in Finland, for example, has taken a model from the Nordic cooperation, you can see that it really happened. But this it's not every day you can see this kind of effects for the Nordic cooperation. formalize the work in order to help the network to accomplish the goals. I think there's some kind of a formalization is needed because otherwise the participants can't work or be productive in the network because they can't use their time. So I think the mandates are important in some level. And then I think, Andra, you have mentioned earlier also that you made these agreements with the organizations where the participants come from. And I think we are proceeding in the same direction. We would like to do it also because I think it makes some kind of a clarity. It clarifies a little the role of the participants in relation to their management. We are all the time struggling with the languages. I think there you could be pragmatic and take the most suitable solution. I think you can mix quite easily English and the Scandinavian languages and let people express themselves in the languages they feel comfortable with. And then I think enjoy and have fun because it is, I think the dinners are sometimes as important as the meetings and also the breaks and coffee breaks and so on. Yes, and here you can find some more information about us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kai. Thank you very much, Andra and Hans, for your presentations. You're talking about sharing knowledge and networks, and what you've just did was to share knowledge, and you inspired me in many ways, and thank you for that. Now we have 20 minutes where we have time to discuss with each other a little bit, and I'd like to ask you and ask Hans to answer first, and then Andra, and after that Kai, and then we can have a free round of discussion. But Hans, what did you note in particular concerning the two other presentations? And what do you see is most important for our future work with sharing knowledge and working with networks across the Nordic countries?
Well, I guess, yes, thank you for some exciting presentations, Kai and Andra. And for me in particular, it was just exciting to get, as I said, in our study, we worked from a very broad definition of the social field. So we talked to state actors from many different corners, you could say, of the social field. So it's very interesting for me to just hear some more descriptions about your experiences working with actual specific networks, because we've talked about it with our interviewees on a more general level. So thank you for that. I think it was just, yes, very interesting to hear about, as you said, Andra, that how important trust is and how you work on regularly considering, do we have the right representation and the right competence? And so just how that work is carried out. And I think that was very very interesting for me to hear about, like the operational level, and the same to you, Kai. Interesting for me to hear about your perspective on this. You said that the formal or the high level networks were often not the best, and I can see that, and that was just an interesting point for me. And also the point you had about how important it might be to make these agreements with the organizations that participants in networks come from. So I guess for me, it was just a really exciting inputs on how is this carried out? How do you work with networks on a more, a more basic level, you could say. A consideration for me when hearing your presentations, actually, both of them, and something I've been thinking about earlier also is, we talk a lot about the potential in networks for giving inspiration to each other. But is there also a potential for going further? How do you see that on, and I guess I'm asking also because it was a little bit a part of the study that we did. There was like an interest for looking at, could there be a potential for developing actual, for example, interventions or descriptions of interventions that were common across the Nordic countries? Because at least in some cases, what we saw was that all the Nordic countries there are some methods for at-risk children and youth, for example, that are used by all the countries and that they all make their own descriptions of. So the Socialstyrelsen in Sweden, they make their description. The Socialstyrelsen in Denmark does the same, and Kasvuntuki does it in Finland, and so on and so on. So, and I guess we kind of found that, we're not there yet anyway, but in more general terms, do you see is there potential for more binding cooperation, or is it inspiration that is that's what networks are going to be also in the future? I would like to hear your perspectives on that. So I just answered with a question. I'm sorry, Leif.
Thank you, Hans, and I'll leave the word to you, Andra.
Thank you. What I noted from both my colleague speakers is, and I strongly agree to that there is really a potential for Nordic cooperation. And just comparing it with European cooperation, which is also very strong in lifelong learning, we have the common history, we have the common values, and also the principles of governance in the Nordic countries are quite similar, even if it can be at the national level or it can be at the regional, but still the principles are similar. So for that respect, there is a potential. We don't have to start from scratch from explaining these main principles. We can start working, sharing, developing. So it gives the cooperation another depth and another level. Having said that, the Nordic cooperation and Nordic, at least under the Nordic Council of Ministers, it is the consensus cooperation. The countries have to agree. They have to agree on issues they want to cooperate. They have to agree also on the main principles. They have to agree on what type of product or output we want to achieve. And that takes time. And it's not easy, like also you said. So my kind of advice and experience is give time to reaching this consensus. Be clever about the needs and possibilities. Sometimes it will take a compromise. It will not be the most ambitious result, but it will be owned by most or all of the countries. So reaching this consensus and giving time to discussions, we experienced that in COVID times when work went on and also when new things were started, we all agreed on the screen. We were just happily nodding and saying, this is good. And 1 year later, we found out that, in fact, the understanding was not there. So we had to kind of back. So you lose time. Better give time to agree and reach the consensus. About potential and what is possible, again, that relates to this, that if the countries' organizations would agree on a certain result or product or goal, then it can be used across countries, but with adaptations and adaptations. An example, what we have done recently, besides the tool that I showed about hard to reach learners, that is translated, it's a very small one. We've worked together on quality issues in recognition of prior learning, which is called also validation, realkompetensvurdering in Nordic. Each country has their own system. The countries have different ways of financing, but the principles that education and working life are involved are similar. And then the countries have said we strive for a high quality of this type of service, where the individual is in the center. It's not the working place, it's not the school, it's not the state, but individual, which is a Nordic value, I should say. And out of that common value and common agreement, the countries have agreed on certain principles. What is high quality service for recognizing prior learning? And that's kind of a benchmark that the countries can compare themselves to. They can compare also their own internal development. If Finland doesn't want to be compared with Sweden, fine, but Finland can benchmark its own development. So there is a common agreement, and then the countries can use that developed quality measurement issue as they want. And then once a year, there is an agreement, or once in 2 years, we also make this cross-country analysis, not to evaluate you are better than the other, but simply to see how the development is going. So there is a potential for such common things but time for agreeing on what is important is essential. And I'll stop here.
Thank you, Andra. Kai?
Yes, there were a lot of things that you could continue discussing, but maybe Hans, it was interesting your idea about a common platform for interventions, for example, and we haven't really maybe solved the question totally. We are publishing reports every now and then, gathering good solutions, but I think more could be done on that topic. That is one of the main questions which is asked from us all the time, to share the good interventions or good solutions. We also get questions about strategic cooperation policy, etc. But good solutions is an interesting question. We don't have very good experiences of the internet platforms, for example, for those, and we have been trying to get into the national, so that we as a Nordic actor could come into the national knowledge forums, but it's not. We haven't covered really all the countries. It seems to be easier to work in the country where you are. So for Sweden, I think we have succeeded a little better than the other countries. Concerning Andra, I would like to continue discussing the top-down and bottom-up principles for starting up networks, because we have experiences from both of them, but I think the Nordic traditions in the Nordic cooperation, formal cooperation, are top-down. And I think we have seen some very good examples of the opposite, that it has started maybe on the expert level, and then you somehow would like to formalize it in the Nordic cooperation, and there seem not really be good enough structures for that in the Nordic cooperation at the moment. You don't really know how to do then, other than maybe somebody makes a suggestion to the civil to the committee of senior officials, for example. Then, but the system is not built for that maybe at the moment. So I would like to study a little more on that question. Yes, there was a question. I have written the cooperation. I think, Hans, you mentioned now. I think I forgot a little what you said, but I was just I wanted to suggest Nord Plus, for example. There are different Nordic possibilities for cooperation. So if you really want to develop new methods, for example, for social work and so on, so Nord Plus is quite a good way of. You just apply for some project money from Nord Plus and then do the development work together with other Nordic. Mainly at Nord Plus is mainly meant for the educational institutions like schools and universities, but anyway, that's a good possibility. Thank you.
Thank you, all three of you. And we still have a few minutes left. So if you have comments to make to each other after this round, you're welcome. Okay. If I may ask a question, or I got inspired from many things you said, but you mentioned, Andrea, one thing, the power of diversity. It made me think about our third seminar about universal design. And it relates also to what you said about the focus on consensus and how we work with creating consensus, and that needs time and resources to get there. I was just wondering if we also, or your since you point out the power of diversity, if there is something we also should have in mind there, the way we work with consensus and diversity. Do you have any reflections on that?
Yes. Well, one example I mentioned was the NVL Digital Inclusion Network, which consists of schools, institutions, public authorities, and so on. But they have been working with the end users, the persons who really need to change the services. One interest organization has become part of the network, but otherwise they've been working closely together with these user groups because they lacked that part in the network, so to say. It was from the decision making, from the service provision point of view. They said if they cannot, it's difficult for maybe end user that is from a socially excluded group to commit to a long-term Nordic cooperation, but they come in as a partner, as a discussion partner. So that's one example of diversity. Another example, and then I'll stop there, is our network for prison education. For prison educators, you can imagine, as the word says, it's a very specific system and it's a very closed system. They have said, we don't want to work and learn only within our own system. So they've been fighting to have also schools providing education within and for prisons, part of the network. There are very high security things and so on. They've managed, in fact, to make the partnerships for those from inside and outside, because they say we need to bridge this way for inmates to come out. So, and that has not been easy. First, the authorities, of course, working with the services, they wanted only their own members due to understanding reasons, but they had this goal to bring in people and schools from outside and trainers, and that has been really appreciated because they get another view on learning and education and input. So it has not been easy to achieve that, but it's been really rewarding, and this win-win is greater for all the members.
Thank you. And do you have any other comments, the three of you?
Well, I could say something about somehow connected to diversity. I think we participated a week ago in a seminar about digitalization and different groups in the Nordic countries who maybe are challenged a little by digitalization, the new technology, and so on. And I think that was a good example of how you should involve different actors in the discussion, because there the research is needed, the people who are making the laws, legislation, they are needed, and other experts are needed, the NGOs are needed, but especially the persons who represent the target group themselves somehow. And that is usually this kind of development work has to be done on a very individual level somehow, that you accept the individual differences somehow for the users. One maybe important strategic partner was maybe anyway missing from the seminar. It was the private sector, because the applications and the technology comes nowadays from the private sector. So I think there to include the diverse groups in the development work, but also all the other actors who have a share in the question, then I think we would have a little better digitalization at least. You are muted.
Thank you. Thank you, Kai. And I think we should let this be the final word for today. Of course, the discussions continue, and I hope we will be able to join networks across our countries also in the future. I'm sure we will. And I'm sure the discussions like this and sharing of knowledge will qualify the way we work together. So thank you very much. And I'll just remind you all that this webinar is taped and will be available. You'll get a mail from Carsten in a short while, where you can go back to the webinar, see it again if you would like, or share it with someone else. And then I shall tell you the last thing is that we are planning to be back with you later next year with webinars, and you'll hear from us. So stay tuned, and thank you very much for your 3 inspiring presentations, and thank you for the webinar today. Have a nice day, everybody.